Nexus Dune presents a reading of the novel Element 181, written by Christopher Page. Narration provided by 11 Labs. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, organizations, places, events, and incidents may be either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. This is also part one of a three-part story. As such, you will encounter a variety of mysteries, characters, and concepts that will be further developed in the story's next installment. The author hopes you will find the journey to be thought-provoking and entertaining. For more information about the author and his other work, please visit nexusdune.com. Now, on to the story. Day 1, Chapter 1. Aegean Sea, 12 miles, south-southwest of Santorini, Greece, 6:31 p.m. It was the perfect day for sailing. A strong, steady wind was blowing from the west, filling the sails of the sleek 50-foot sailboat. As the white hull cut through sapphire waters, a tall, bronze-skinned man stood at the helm, gripping the starboard wheel with one hand. He had been standing in this position for an hour, his steel-blue eyes fixed upon the horizon. Leo Brevon's gaze drifted to the strings fluttering on the jib line. He turned the wheel slowly, bringing the bow directly into the wind. At just the right moment, he loosened the jib and mainsail. Immediately, the fabric started to ruffle, and the Sainte-Marie lost her forward momentum. As the boat slowed to a crawl, Leo released the plough anchor and observed his destination, a tiny, uninhabited island 40 yards off the port bow. Ascania. The sloping dome-like rock was approximately 500 yards wide and 100 feet high. Like other small islands in this part of Greece, there were no trees here, no plants, no animals, nothing but bare, windswept stone. The island was a desolate place rarely visited. It lacked even a small beach that otherwise might have made it interesting for tourists. Sensing movement in front of him, Leo glanced down at the open companionway. A pretty blonde woman wearing a black bikini appeared from below decks. Leo grinned as she crossed the deck towards him. For a moment he forgot all about the island. "Hiya, sailor," Diane said brightly in a French accent that was inherently flirtatious. She wrapped her arms around Leo's chest and kissed his neck. After a long moment she pulled back, her attention turning to the island. "What's going on?" she asked. "Why are we stopping?" Leo smiled and pointed. It seemed like a good spot to try some more spearfishing. "It's called Ascania." Diane frowned. "You're going again?" "Why not?" Leo paused. "What's with the funny look?" Diane ran her fingers slowly through Leo's hair. Just above his hairline there was a deep, ugly scar, 5 inches long. She leaned forward and kissed the mark lovingly. "You know what I mean." "Oh, come on," Leo said, shaking his head. "What am I supposed to do? Stop living my life because of that?" He peppered Diane's face with kisses, then added earnestly, "I'll be fine. I promise." Diane touched the scar. Her eyes filled with tenderness as she said, "I just don't want anything to happen to you, that's all. Especially after, you know." She paused, her voice trailing off. Leo grimaced, thinking back. 3 days earlier, he had fallen asleep while sunbathing. Upon awakening, his entire body had been paralyzed. Fingers, toes, arms, legs, nothing worked. He couldn't even open his eyes, although he could hear everything. The water sloshing against the hull, the wind rippling through the sails, Diane singing along with the rolling stones on the sound system. But that was it. Eventually, after several terrifying minutes, the paralysis subsided, and control of his body returned. As he sat up, he noticed Diane standing at the wheel. She was steering the boat, totally unaware of what had taken place. She would never have known anything had he not said something. He wished now he had kept his mouth shut. "Don't worry about it," he said with a big smile. "It was nothing. Really, it's no big deal." But the doctors had warned him something like this would happen, and keep happening. The placement of the bullet inside his brain made surgery impossible. All he could do, they told him, was to live his life and hope for the best. Unfortunately, this had also meant his career as a police detective was over. According to his captain at the LAPD, he could ride a desk for the rest of his life, but his days of cruising the streets and arresting criminals were over. For someone who could lose consciousness without warning, driving a department vehicle and possessing a firearm were out of the question. In many ways, this had been the worst part of it. Pain he could handle. Uncertainty he could accept. But to lose the job he loved for doing the job he loved, it was a fate too cruel. Upon his release from the hospital, he had promptly turned in his badge and gun and walked away from the only profession he had ever known. The following day, he had met Diane, a nurse at the hospital where he was doing his follow-up medical visit. They exchanged phone numbers, and the rest was history. In the 3 months since then, the memories of his life as a cop had grown distant in his mind, like scenes from a movie he could now only barely remember. He had often wondered since arriving in Greece, was it a result of his condition, or was it because of these islands, and being in the company of the most wonderful woman he had ever known? He didn't know and didn't care. The truth was, he was happier now on this boat, with her, than he had ever been before. As to what his life would be like in a month or a year, he had no idea. He was drifting, and he was content to drift. Diane ran her hands along Leo's shoulders. She nodded towards the sea. "I could dive with you, just in case. I don't mind." Leo understood this was code for if it happens again. Having another episode while underwater could be fatal. But spearfishing was a new and unique pleasure in his life. It was something he preferred to do alone. "Thanks, but I'll be all right," he said. "I like going by myself. Besides, with both of us down there, we'd only spook the fish." Diane shrugged. Leo understood the risks. So did she. In a way, it made their time together more precious, knowing it could end at any moment. "Suit yourself," she said with a smile as she put on her red heart-shaped sunglasses. She gave Leo a quick kiss as she slipped past him, then climbed to the narrow deck above. "While you're doing that, I'm going to finish my book. I'm on the last chapter." "Which one are you reading?" Diane picked up a nearby paperback as she stretched out on a towel. She angled the cover so Leo could see the title. It read, "Architecture and Monuments of the Ancient World." "Exciting stuff," said Leo teasingly. "I know, what can I say? I'm a big nerd." Leo chuckled. "An incredibly, unbelievably gorgeous nerd, and I'm crazy about you." Diane grinned as she slipped off her bikini top. "As you should be," she said playfully. She dangled the skimpy piece of fabric in front of her before letting it drop. "Now, go catch us some dinner while I work on these tan lines." Leo laughed again. For a moment he was tempted to put off the dive, but reconsidered when he observed the sun's position. There was only an hour or two of good light remaining, and the galley was nearly empty. Lunch had consisted of a single frozen burrito, bean and cheese. He was determined to avoid the same fate for dinner. Leo glanced at the GPS screen by the wheel, then hit a button and saved the coordinates into the computer. Next, he reached for his dive vest, a buoyancy compensator fitted with a single oxygen tank. As he lifted the heavy BC, Leo paused, his eyes drawn to the small bronze medallion hanging around his neck. He had purchased it 2 weeks earlier on the island of Naxos as a souvenir of this, his first trip to Greece. It was round, about the size of a $50 and attached to a thin leather cord. He thought about the object he had placed inside for safekeeping. The memory prompted a brief smile. "When we get back to Naxos," he promised himself silently, then lowered the medallion and returned to the task at hand. He quickly tightened the vest's straps and made adjustments until everything felt secure and comfortable. Once he was ready, he grabbed his weapon of choice for the day's hunt, an enclosed track mahogany spear gun armed with a flopper spear tip. Gripping the gun tightly, he sat on the hard edge of the gunwale and took a deep breath. He waved at Diane as he bit down on the regulator, then let himself fall backwards. An instant later, he entered the blue sea with a quiet splash. Chapter 2. Rome, Italy, 6:13 p.m. The overweight, middle-aged man looked out of place amongst the crowd of youthful summer travellers. In contrast to their t-shirts, shorts and sandals, he was wearing an ill-fitting, tattered black suit. A crooked, bulbous nose centred a wide, unattractive face. His skin was pale and unhealthy looking. His wiry dark hair was wild and streaked with grey. In fact, the only thing he seemed to have in common with the young people around him was the red backpack he carried over one shoulder. As the man continued on, he walked past the famous outdoor staircase, the Spanish Steps. The massive scalinata rose dramatically from a wide cobblestone plaza towards an old church occupying the hill above, the Trinità dei Monti. The steps were a popular attraction in Rome. Today, like most afternoons during the summer, the tourists were out in force. With blue skies overhead and a warm breeze blowing, the steps offered a picture-perfect setting to relax with some fresh gelato or an iced cappuccino. The man in the black suit, however, showed no interest in such things. He shouldered his way purposefully through the slow-moving throng until he was able to escape down a narrow alley. After walking for a few minutes, he reached a quiet street, Via della Scrofa. It was flanked on either side by rows of elegant old buildings. Beautiful apartments occupied the upper floors. Ground-level units contained shops, cafes, boutiques, and other small businesses. 2 blocks down, the man approached a glass storefront. A neon sign hung in the window, mailboxes, etc. As he opened the door and entered, a young clerk behind the counter glanced up. Startled eyes fixed on the man for a moment longer than necessary before quickly diverting. The man ignored the clerk. Most people reacted similarly when they saw him for the first time. He was used to it by now. Easing his way along the wall of square numbered boxes, the man stopped at the end of the row. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a set of keys, one of which opened box number 1938. From inside the mailbox, the man withdrew a slim stack of hand-addressed, stamped letters. He glanced at each of them individually before folding them up and stuffing them into his pocket. He then closed the mailbox and quickly exited the store. Once outside, George Rothschild headed south for another block. He turned left into a darkened side street where an unmarked opening appeared in the wall. There was no sign above it, nothing to indicate what lay beyond. As Rothschild neared the doorway, he stopped when he heard his cell phone beep. A text message. The special tone indicated the sender's identity. He had been waiting for this. Rothschild withdrew the phone and glanced at the screen. It said, "Crew assembled, drill acquired, name and location of boat." Rothschild quickly tapped a response. Varacci, slip 29. Marina Porta Romano. Fueled and ready. Let me know when you arrive. Once the message was sent, Rothschild slipped the phone into his pocket. He ducked through the opening and entered a steep, dirty stairwell. With his first breath, he almost choked on the stench. A stale mix of cigarette smoke and human sweat wafted up from below. It was the same unpleasant smell he remembered from his previous visits. At the bottom of the steps, Rothschild entered a dark, cheerless dungeon that served as a late-night dance club. At this hour there were only a few solitary figures slouched at the bar. Otherwise, the place was deserted. Rothschild signalled the bartender as he walked to the back of the room. There he settled into one of the club's 4 red leather booths. Each had a black velvet curtain that could be drawn for complete privacy. Rothschild placed the backpack next to him as the bartender approached. The young man had a shaved head and silver hoops in his lips. As he took the drink order, 3 single malts, neat triples, he averted his gaze. Like the clerk, he was unsettled by Rothschild's appearance. The drinks were delivered a few minutes later. When the bartender set the glasses down, Rothschild leaned forward. "If it's not too much trouble, I would ask you for a small favour," Rothschild said in a low voice in Italian, although his words were tinged with the heavy accent of Eastern Europe. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a €100 note, offering it to the bartender. "I'm waiting for a friend. We won't be here long, but we would like to be left alone. No more service, no more drinks." He pointed at the glasses of scotch. "This is all we'll need. Understood?" The young man nodded and shrugged in agreement. He took the money and withdrew with a brief grazie. It was the middle of the day, and business was slow. €100 was more than enough to buy 3 drinks and a little privacy. As the bartender walked away, Rothschild reached for one of the glasses. He drained the contents in a series of rapid, deep gulps. The feeling prompted a pleasant sigh as he placed the letters from his pocket on the table. One by one, he opened them. The first envelope contained a cashier's cheque drawn on a bank in Geneva, Switzerland. It was made out to George Rothschild in the amount of €424,350. In the memo section, the notation read, "Gold icons, small." The rest of the envelopes contained similar-looking cashier's cheques for equally large amounts. In the memo sections of each cheque, there were short descriptions such as Renaissance oil, Roman bust, gilded, and Greek battle scene. The combined value of the cheques amounted to just over €2 million. Satisfied, Rothschild slipped the cheques into their envelopes and put them away, then lifted a second glass of scotch. The first one had been to steady his nerves. The second was to sip and enjoy. He pushed the first empty glass to the side. However, before he was able to take a sip, he sensed someone approaching. Rothschild looked up and noticed a familiar face. Larry Finch had clear blue eyes, perfect teeth, and what some people would call a winning smile. He was well tanned with silver, thinning hair. He reminded Rothschild of a successful politician or the CEO of a large corporation. His dark blue pinstripe suit was custom-tailored. The pale silk tie and matching pocket square merely added to his elegant appearance. Over his shoulder, he carried a long leather tube with a strap. "Ah, there you are, old boy," Finch said cheerfully as he slid into the booth and sat down. His British accent was genuine and crisp. He placed the tube on the space next to him and smiled. "I hope you haven't been waiting long." "Hello, Mr. Finch," said Rothschild dryly, switching to English. "Your timing's perfect. I just got here myself." "Oh, good." Rothschild gestured to the drinks as he reached up and closed the curtain. "I hope it's not too early." "Dear heavens, no," Finch noted with a grin. "What are we having?" He sniffed one of the drinks before tasting it. "Ah, a blend. How democratic." Rothschild sighed. "I can send it back," he said. Finch waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be silly. It's quite all right. Cheers." The two men touched glasses. "I received your checks today. Punctual as always. I appreciate that. Thank you." "No, Mr. Rothschild," Finch said, his voice full of sudden warmth. "It is I who should be thanking you. After all, it has been a very good month. For both of us, I would say." "Indeed," Rothschild agreed, nodding towards the leather tube. "I've been looking forward to this for quite some time." "I think you'll be pleased. The painting is in excellent condition." "I certainly hope so." Rothschild laid a hand on the backpack. "It would be unfortunate to have brought this for nothing." Finch laughed appropriately, then reached for the leather tube. After allowing for a dramatic pause, he placed it on the table tenderly, as though it might break or explode if handled roughly. Opening one end of the tube, Rothschild slowly withdrew a rolled-up canvas. He pulled back the bottom edge gently, just enough to find the signature. Prior to today, Rothschild had seen numerous high-resolution photographs of the painting, but never the real thing until now. It was the signature that most concerned him. In the bottom right-hand corner, faded crimson letters spelling the name Lorick were cracked but legible. From his jacket pocket, Rothschild removed a small magnifying glass. He spent the next full minute examining the signature. As he did so, a chill passed through him. The sensation of touching the thing was positively thrilling. This was it, he thought. It has to be. When Rothschild finally lowered the magnifying glass and looked up, he nodded approvingly. "Thank you for this. It's wonderful." "I'm so glad you like it," Finch purred, "and that we were able to come to terms. I hope your other client wasn't too disappointed." "Ah, yes, her," Finch remarked with a quiet laugh. "The truth is, I haven't told her yet. I'm sure she'll be devastated, of course, but our relationship is rather special, and special relationships do get preferential treatment, don't they?" "I suppose they do. To be honest, over these past few months you've become much more like a partner than a client." Finch raised his glass, an exclamation point to the compliment. "I couldn't agree more," Rothschild said, noticing a sudden crop of perspiration on Finch's face. The nightclub was chilly from the air conditioning, yet beads of sweat were dotting Finch's brow. The moisture glistened in the dim light. Rothschild felt a tingling in his stomach. Something was wrong. They had transacted business in this club numerous times before, in this very same booth. Always, Finch had been the perfect salesman, relaxed, pleasant, as if they were just old friends meeting for drinks instead of conspirators in a criminal enterprise. In fact, their meeting today had begun this way. But something had changed. Finch was starting to fidget, tapping his fingers on the table, fiddling with his wedding ring, shifting in his seat. But why? It made no sense. Rothschild took a deep breath and grimaced inwardly, although outwardly he maintained his composure. He lifted the backpack and slid it across the table. "It's all there. 200,000 euros. Feel free to count it." Finch reached for the bag and unzipped it. Inside he could see the bundles of 100-euro notes. They were bound in official wrappers from the Banca Credito Italiano. He leaned down, placing his face close to the opening. Long ago he had learned that the smell of freshly minted money was one thing counterfeiters could never duplicate exactly. Finch flipped through a stack of bills and inhaled the tantalizing odor. The scent was authentic. Satisfied, he put the money back and zipped up the bag. "It's always a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Rothschild. I do hope you enjoy your painting." "I most certainly will," Rothschild replied cheerfully. He lifted his drink, toasting the moment. "Above all else, one must have passion in life, Mr. Finch. Wouldn't you agree?" The comment caught Finch by surprise. Something about that sentiment coming from a man who looked like George Rothschild seemed out of place. Finch paused for a second, then raised his glass. "To passion. May it keep our hearts warm and our pockets full." "Hear, hear," rejoined Rothschild. Together, he and Finch finished off their drinks with a flourish. "Oh, I almost forgot," Rothschild said, sitting up straight as he set his glass down. "There is another matter I'd like to discuss with you, that is, if you're not too pressed for time." "Of course," Finch responded merrily. "What is it?" "I'd like to show you something." From his jacket's side pocket, Rothschild removed a plain cardboard box. He placed it on the table. "You might find this interesting. I know I was intrigued when I first saw it." "You know how I love surprises," Finch said, as he reached for the box and opened it. As he pulled back the tissue paper, his eyes widened in astonishment. Carefully, he removed the object within. The golden cross was approximately 5 inches wide and 7 inches long. It was more than an inch thick. From its weight and how it gleamed in the light, Finch could tell immediately it was made of solid gold. He had never seen anything quite like it. The entire surface, front to back, top to bottom, was covered with religious imagery. Intricate depictions had been cut into the metal with amazing detail. A fish, a dove, the Virgin, a nativity scene, the faces of various saints. There were double lines of white and red stones embedded along the edges, most likely diamonds and rubies, Finch thought. Of course, this would need to be verified, but George Rothschild was not the sort of man to dabble in imitations. "Incredible, isn't it?" Rothschild remarked. "It's one of a kind. Extremely valuable." Finch nodded, then looked up. "And from me, you would like what, exactly?" Rothschild smiled. "What you do so well, of course. Arrange a discreet sale to one of your more discriminating customers." Finch sighed as he turned the artifact over in his hands, studying it. He thought of all the money he was going to make. The idea made him feel warm inside. But then his thoughts turned to the man sitting across from him, and the feeling grew cold. After numerous successful transactions together, George Rothschild was still a total mystery to him. 6 months earlier, Rothschild had called him on his private line, a number he only shared with his most trusted contacts. He introduced himself as an avid collector and a former client of Wagner Zashka, a man who had once served Finch as a reliable, if somewhat low-level supplier of stolen goods. Sadly, that relationship had ended 9 months earlier, when Zashka's body had been pulled from the Tiber River. His death had been ruled a homicide by the police. No suspects had ever been arrested to Finch's knowledge. It was an unsavory yet unsurprising end for a career criminal like Wagner Zashka. As to the stranger on the phone claiming to be one of Zashka's clients, Finch had been reluctant to meet with Rothschild in person. The black market for high-end art was a dangerous and rarefied world. Finch made a good living dealing with just a handful of extremely rich and corrupt art enthusiasts. Inviting a new person into this circle was not something that happened often. Finch's first instinct was to decline the meeting. However, Rothschild had been charmingly persuasive. He claimed to have a discriminating eye and a passion for rare artwork that was off-market. Apparently, Zashka had mentioned his name several times as someone who specialized in such accommodations. Reluctantly, Finch had acquiesced, agreeing to meet for a drink. They had met in this club, in the very same booth they were sitting in now. In retrospect, it was a meeting Finch was glad to have taken. Over the past 6 months, to his surprise, rather than acting primarily as a customer, George Rothschild had become an important supplier of genuinely rare and valuable artifacts, all of which had come from his stable of so-called wealthy but cash-strapped friends. Finch had never believed the stories, but the quality of the items was always exquisite, like this golden cross. Selling Rothschild's merchandise had been easy. The transactions had made him a great deal of money. It also made him nervous because he still knew nothing about Rothschild personally. "There's always a market for high-quality items in excellent condition," Finch said, his thoughts returning to the matter at hand. "Naturally, though, it would help me assess its value if I knew exactly what it was." Rothschild pointed at the cross. "That, my friend, once belonged to the Pope." "Which one?" Rothschild paused, thinking. "Celestine III. That was a long time ago." "It was. The cross was a gift to a bishop of an Orthodox church in Constantinople, back before the city was sacked during the Crusades." "In 1204. "Exactly." Finch stared at the cross, running his finger along the edge. He was intrigued but not surprised. All of Rothschild's rarities were somehow related to the Catholic Church. "Fascinating. Amongst your circle, I'm sure this little detail would add something to its value," pressed Rothschild. "Undoubtedly," Finch murmured. "But why me? Surely you could go to Christie's or Sotheby's. They would certainly get more for it." Rothschild smiled with a disarming laugh. "It belongs to a friend. He knows nothing about this sort of thing, and he is not, shall we say, unknown to the public. It would be embarrassing for him to so much as make an inquiry. More so for his wife. I offered to act as their intermediary, that's all." "You certainly do have some interesting friends, Mr. Rothschild." The tone of sarcasm was thick in Finch's voice. The truth was, he found it difficult to believe that George Rothschild had any friends, much less rich and famous ones. Many times he had wondered why a man of Rothschild's obvious financial means would allow himself to walk around in such an unflattering manner. If Finch had seen him in the street, he could easily have mistaken him for being homeless. Surely the man could afford a haircut and some decent clothes. After all, he had just given him a bag with 200,000 euros in it. "For my best clients, I do try to be obliging whenever I can," Finch said with a friendly shrug. "How would you like to proceed?" "As we normally do. Make the cashier's check out to me. I'll settle up with the family privately." Finch suppressed the urge to chuckle. These stories of well-to-do families needing money were most likely pure fiction. Nevertheless, Finch had to admit, Rothschild's treasures were not only valuable and unique, but they were also clean. Since the beginning of their relationship, he had quietly emailed pictures of Rothschild's rarities to his contacts at Interpol and the FBI. If any of these objects had been stolen, a report would have been filed somewhere. Pictures would be circulating. In this day and age, hiding the theft of objects like those trafficked by Rothschild was impossible, unless they weren't stolen. The situation was bewildering. "Very well, as you wish, but I must admit," Finch continued, "I really don't know how you manage it. You truly are a magician of the first rate. How many of these treasures have you brought me now? 12? 13? I think I've lost count. One of these days, you'll have to tell me how you do it." Rothschild smiled, shaking his head. "Mr. Finch, first of all, I'm quite sure you never lose count of anything. And secondly, the truth is I really am guilty of only one thing, knowing too many rich people who live beyond their means. But your compliment is noted." Rothschild cleared his throat and folded his hands neatly on the table in front of him. "Now, to business, shall we? The price for the cross is 250,000 euros. This is what the family requires. They won't take a single euro less." Finch paused. His thoughts suddenly shifted from suspicion to the matter at hand. Bargaining. He didn't want to haggle too hard, but he had to push back at least a little. Otherwise, what kind of businessman would he be? "I do know a few people who might be interested," Finch said. "Something this old with these diamonds and rubies, provided they're real, of course. It should attract some attention. But let me be honest. The price of $250 seems a little high." Rothschild shook his head sadly, as though he were deeply offended. "Mr. Finch, the diamonds are not large, but they are nearly flawless, as are most of the rubies. A price of $250 is more than fair. The family won't accept less than that, and only if the transaction can be arranged quickly." Finch studied the cross again, feeling its weight. He counted the gemstones, making rapid calculations in his mind. Over his many years in the business, he had become an expert at approximating a stone's carat weight with just a glance. The real value here, he realized, was not the object's historical significance. The story about a medieval pope and Constantinople might make for interesting conversation at a cocktail party, but the real money to be made here would come from melting down the gold and selling off the gems individually. At a minimum, he figured, it was worth at least €400,000, give or take. It would be a quick and painless profit. "I'll make some calls," Finch said finally with a reluctant sigh. His voice was the sound of a man being taken advantage of, all part of the dance. "Excellent," Rothschild pronounced, his grey eyes twinkling in the dim light. "How long do you think it will take?" "Give me a few days. I'll let you know." "Very well," Rothschild said. "I'll leave you to it. As always, it's been a pleasure." Larry Finch nodded as he slipped the cross into his pocket. And with that, the agreement was made. Rothschild rose without offering his hand. "Please do me the courtesy of waiting a few minutes before leaving the club. It wouldn't do for either of us to be seen together." "Of course, I understand." "Then, until next time, Mr. Finch," Rothschild said, bowing slightly before pulling back the curtain and walking away with the leather tube containing the canvas. In a moment, he was gone. Chapter 3. With 30 pounds of ballast attached to his weight belt, Leo sank through the crystalline waters like a rock. When he reached a depth of 30 feet, he allowed a burst of air into his vest, halting his descent. As he leveled off, he read the air gauge on his BC. He had 40 minutes worth of mixture at this depth, plenty of time to catch one fish. Leo kicked his fins hard and swam off towards the island. He quickly reached Ascania's rocky perimeter, then turned south, travelling with the current, his fins barely moving. Within minutes he saw a flash of colour to his left, an undulating ball of silvery blue and metallic green light, a school of anchovies. As food, they were not what he was after, but their presence was a good sign. There was life here. Soon the island's appearance began to change. The stone surface became increasingly craggy and uneven. Swimming in and out of countless holes and pockets were dozens of smaller fish, mostly sea bream. Like the anchovies, they were too small to be of interest. Leo ignored them. He continued drifting along, his eyes alert, his grip steady. Several minutes passed before he finally saw an opportunity worth pursuing. There. Approximately 50 feet in front of him, a single red mullet was swimming alone. It was fully grown, 7 or 8 pounds by the look of it. Leo imagined a pair of thick fillets sizzling on the grill and felt his stomach rumble. He raised the spear gun, kicked his fins, and moved in for the kill. However, as he approached, the red mullet seemed to sense a disturbance in the water. Turning abruptly, it darted towards the island and vanished. Leo pursued with a burst of speed, expecting the hunt to end quickly in one of the many holes dotting the island's rocky face. However, when he reached the spot where the fish had disappeared, he noticed a tall gap between two sections of overlapping stone. The fish, he realized, must have slipped through this opening. With the spear gun raised and his finger on the trigger, Leo ventured cautiously between the vertical shafts. But as he squeezed through the narrow space, the sight that greeted him pushed all other thoughts from his mind. Beyond an area of flat sandy seafloor, a huge black scar appeared in the island. The opening was easily 20 feet wide and nearly as tall. An underwater cave. However, what Leo found so startling was not the cave itself, but the pair of massive stone columns that framed the dark opening. Each column was spiral-shaped and huge, at least 10 feet in diameter. Amazed, Leo swam forward to get a better look. Laying a hand on one of the column's curving spines, he looked up, surprised to see that it was not freestanding. Instead, it had been carved like a sculpture from the raw stone of the island. It was cracked and crumbling in places, and appeared to be incredibly old. Leo felt his pulse quicken. Images of forgotten treasure raced through his mind. He had no idea what civilization was responsible for the columns, Greek, Roman, Ottoman, or how they had come to be underwater. However, one thing seemed clear. Long ago, this place had once been deemed important enough to justify such monumental adornments. Unfortunately, a curtain of impenetrable darkness began just a few feet beyond the cave's entrance. Any exploration of the interior would require a powerful light. Leo thought back. He had seen a pair of dive lights on the Saint-Marie when he and Diane had first set sail from Naxos. He glanced at his air gauge. If he hurried, he calculated, he should be able to return to the boat, find a light, and make it back to the cave with enough air to conduct a brief survey of the interior. Excited by the thought, Leo looked up and kicked hard with his fins, rising quickly towards the surface. Moments later, to his surprise, the fish he had been chasing earlier suddenly emerged from its hiding place. As the red mullet darted past him, Leo raised the spear gun, aimed for less than a second, then squeezed the trigger. The bolt fired true, striking the fish solidly behind the head. Immediately, a thin stream of blood erupted into the surrounding waters, prompting Leo to smile as he swam forward to collect his prize. Must be my lucky day. When George Rothschild emerged from the nightclub, the sky was full of orange and purple hues. He looked down at his watch, frowning at the time. It was getting late, and he had one more stop to make before going to the airport. He exited the alley and turned north on Via della Scrofa. As he walked, his thoughts grew increasingly troubled. In his mind's eye, he recalled the image of Larry Finch sitting across from him, smiling and sweating, and doing a lousy job of hiding the fact that he was nervous about something. But why? The checks had come. The meeting had gone well. They had transacted business in the same manner many times before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But something just felt wrong. Rothschild continued walking for another block before the answer finally came to him. The sudden revelation hit him like a hammer, sending a cold shiver down his spine. Of course. The glass of scotch. The first glass. All 3 glasses should have been on the table when he left with the painting. However, Rothschild now recalled quite distinctly there had been just 2 glasses on the table when he stood to leave. Finch must have swiped one of the glasses while he was busy studying the painting's signature. Rothschild closed his eyes and groaned. There was only one reason why Finch would take such a risk. The glass had his fingerprints on it. Ever since their initial meeting, Rothschild had gone to great lengths to keep the details of his life as vague as possible. Naturally, Finch was curious about his background. It had taken artful maneuvering on his part to deflect and evade Finch's pointed questions. However, with that glass, Finch finally had the key he needed to unlock the mystery of his past. Finch had excellent contacts with the authorities, Rothschild knew. It wouldn't take him long to learn the truth. His fingerprints were on file with every law enforcement agency in Europe and America. Once a match was made in one of those databases, several problems would immediately follow, and not just with his primary source of income. Rothschild walked on for another block, resisting the idea of what must be done. Finch was a valuable asset, one he had cultivated carefully. However, the possibility, the likelihood, that everything he had been working on these past few months could be ruined with a single phone call to the cops was simply not a chance he was willing to take. With a heavy sigh, Rothschild pulled out his cell phone. He dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a low, gruff voice answered. "Yes?" "Richter, it's me," Rothschild said in English. "Where are you?" "I'm at the airport. I'm about to leave for Greece. Why?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Is there a problem?" "I'm afraid so. Naxos and the professor will have to wait. That needs to be handled, of course, but for now I need you to pay a visit to a friend here in Rome, and it needs to happen tonight."